Hey kids, it's Craig, and this is Between Light and Shadow, a Twilight Zone podcast. This week we are deviating from our usual episode review/synopsis format to present a conversation with author Steven Jay Rubin. Steven is the author of the brand new book, The Twilight Zone Encyclopedia. And as you will hear me gushing repeatedly throughout the interview, it is a spectacular book. I love it. I'm very excited about this book. And I actually had a tiny bit to do with it. About a year or so ago, Steven put the call out, probably, I guess it was on Facebook, looking for a really good picture of Biff Bang Pow's life-size Mystic Seer fortune-telling napkin dispenser replica. So I threw him an email and said, hey, I have it. Would you like me to take a picture of it? He said yes. So I actually took a picture of it along with several other Mystic Seers that I had, the bobblehead and the miniature monitor mate, and then the really miniature Mystic Seer that comes with the William Shatner action figure. And he used it for the book. So if you have your copy of this book, and I'm going to assume that at least some of you, if not most of you, are going to be owning a copy of this book, you will see my picture on page 202. It's in the M section under Machines, Gadgets, and Gizmos. And it's a very nice shot of my Mystic Seer family. I'm very proud of it. I'm also just tickled as hell that I contributed something to such an amazing book. I hope you enjoy this interview. Steven's a great guy. He was very gracious to lend us his time and his thoughts on the Twilight Zone, along with some other stuff, as you will hear. Enjoy.
Where are we?
Right now you're in a kind of a limbo. You're neither here nor there.
Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
Steven, welcome to Between Light and Shadow.
Hi, Craig. How you doing?
I am well. How are you?
I'm great. The parts of Southern California at this moment are burning down, but I seem to be fine.
Yeah, that just happened like last night, right?
Yeah. It's pretty awful down here. I don't live anywhere near the fire zones, but we've been watching the TV, and it's been pretty awful.
Oh my gosh. Well, hopefully you're safe and it doesn't reach you.
Thank you.
I have a lot of friends in the LA Hollywood areas, and I'm really worried. But anyways,
now you have the book, right?
I do have the book.
Oh, good.
You sent it to me.
I've mailed out 50 books in the last 4 weeks, so I sometimes forget if I've sent them or not. I'm glad you got it.
Oh gosh, yeah, no, I got it. It's spectacular. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. It means a lot to me.
I, of course, was especially excited about flipping through and finding my pictures in here. And I got to tell you, I kind of freaked out at first because I was looking under like M for Mystic Seer. It's like, it's not there. It's like, what else could it be? Could it be under F for Fortune Telling Machine? And then I finally just happened to just spot it right there under Machines, Gadgets, and Gizmos.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the book was so much bigger, and some things got shifted around. I can't remember if I had a Mystic Seer. You know, it's funny because the first thing I did in illustration-wise was contact that company that makes the Mystic Seer. Mm-hmm. And they have all these Twilight Zone items, as you know, and I got photos of all of them, and then when I asked them for permission, they said, we have to check with CBS, and I said, well, I guess that's that.
Yeah. Evidently, they had issues earlier on with their action figures securing likeness rights. So they actually had a number of things that they had in production that they had to cancel, including, because in the earlier days when they were doing stuff, I was kind of in regular touch with them, because at that time I ran a Twilight Zone blog.
Right.
And I had requested that they do a Maya the Catgirl figure because of my unnatural passion for Suzanne Lloyd. And and they actually had one. They had one in production. They had a prototype. They had announced that it was coming out, and then they abruptly had pulled it, which was a little heartbreaking for me. But yeah, it came down to CBS not giving them the likeness rights.
Yeah, they won't even let you rent episodes for theatrical release now because I was trying to do something in Hollywood and they just said they just won't because of issues dealing with clearances on actors and music, etc. They just won't let you do that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Especially seeing the episodes on Blu-ray on a big screen TV. I mean, I'd love to see these things, on a really big screen.
Oh, yeah.
In a theater.
Yeah, cool.
It's funny. We have a theater here in Portland, the Hollywood Theater, and there used to be this guy who had a bunch of his own 16-millimeter prints. They would have these viewings, and he would show like 3 Twilight Zone episodes, and he had spliced in like a bunch of vintage commercials and stuff, and it was a lot of fun, but I mean, it was 16 millimeter blown up on a giant screen, and it looked terrible.
Right. Just like those taped episodes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. When I first was watching the Twilight Zone in syndication back in the 80s, there were kinescope versions of those. And then when they started coming out on DVD and Blu-ray, at least they look like video now. So, I mean, I guess it's an improvement, but it's kind of a limited improvement.
Well, it's just because there's such contrast between the way those episodes look and the filmed episodes, which look like they were made yesterday.
Right. No, that's one of the many things I love about the series is just the cinematography. There's some just amazing work done there. And I think that, filmed television was still a relatively new thing. And when you see a lot of the early 50s stuff, it's really flat. It's really basic. I feel like Twilight Zone was one of the first shows that really kind of showed that, look, we can make mini movies here. There's nothing preventing us from doing the exact same thing that we do for theatrical films.
Well, particularly because you're at MGM, which was like the epicenter of Hollywood.
Right. I do have a good Suzanne Lloyd story. I think I kind of offended her once. I had sent off she used to sell signed autographs, or signed 8x10s. And I had sent her, the money, and I asked her to write meow. And thinking that was a perfectly harmless, and I was thinking kind of like a Julie Newmar Catwoman kind of a thing, I thought that would. She was not pleased. In fact, she wrote me back and said Maya would never say meow. I based her on a panther, not on a cat.
She's obviously a method actor.
Yeah, but she still did it. She still wrote meow for me. So.
Oh, well, that's a happy ending.
It is. I don't know I haven't actually checked up on her lately. I don't think. Last I heard, and this was a few years ago, she wasn't in good health. I don't know if. Anyways,
well, according to the last list of all the living Twilight Zone veterans, let's see.
Wait, is that an entry in the encyclopedia?
No, it actually isn't. Because that would be the first thing that would have to be updated. Yeah, she's still around. She's 85.
We are here to talk about your book, which was released very recently, the Twilight Zone Encyclopedia. But before we get to that, I think our listeners would probably like to hear just a little bit about you.
Well, fabulous. Well, I'm a Chicago native. I actually only stayed 4 years in Chicago. My dad didn't like the winters, so we moved to California. I attended UCLA. I was a history major. I've always really been into history going all the way back. I always wrote long-term papers. I really favored stories about military history, particularly. My first book out of college, I decided to interview filmmakers who made the great World War II movies. And it was kind of my film school. It was a way of me learning how films were made and gathering great behind-the-scenes stories. And simultaneously with that, I had contacted Fred Clark, the editor of Cinefantastique magazine in Chicago, And I started doing retrospective articles on classic 1950s science fiction films. And what was particularly gratifying for me was the fan mail I was getting from people who really appreciated the fact that I was digging down into the real stories and interviewing the filmmakers themselves, and had wonderful interviews. My first story was on one of my favorite films called Them, the 1954 giant ant movie featuring a Twilight Zone veteran, of course, James Whitmore.
Right.
And it came about kind of funny because I was finishing the research on my combat films book, and I was interviewing a screenwriter named Ted Scherderman, and he had written a movie called Hell to Eternity with Jeffrey Hunter about Guy Gabaldon, the Marine hero, and he said, it kind of reminds me of what I did on Them, and it kind of struck a nerve with me. In those days, pre-internet, pre-anything reference-wise, we didn't have complete lists of writers' credits. So
I didn't
even know that he wrote them. So I wrote a letter to Cinefantastique. I'd been a relatively new subscriber, and Fred wrote me a very enthusiastic letter back, and I ended up interviewing Ted and the director on that film, Gordon Douglas. And Fred edited the two interviews into a behind-the-scenes piece. But what was really interesting for me is I went to Warner Brothers and got interest for them helping me with the article with illustrations. They gave me 3 behind-the-scenes shots, and no one had ever seen a behind-the-scenes shot on Them. It was like really cool. And then, of course, I went on to do articles on Forbidden Planet and The Day the Earth Stood Still, and each time we would find really, really cool behind-the-scenes shots. And then I did War of the Worlds. And it's funny, this weekend there's going to be a reunion of the Cinefantastique writers. The magazine, of course, has been out of publication for years, but I have very fond memories of the time. It was kind of like the formative time where I was kind of moving from college and research assignments for term papers to retrospective articles and books for the public, and then I became a feature publicist. I found early on that as much as I loved writing about the movies, I couldn't make any money doing it, any significant money. Well, I don't even know if we could classify it as egg money. So I actually, my Cinefantastique background actually got me a job in the movies. I was hired by United Artists in 1978 to be the advance man on Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Wow.
Donald Sutherland remake, yeah.
Oh,
I spent
wow.
10 months on the road, and I went to all the conventions long before conventions were like Comic-Con, and I embarked on a career that lasted over 25 years doing film publicity.
Wow.
And then I went to Showtime in 92. I spent about 8 years with Showtime, and I made my producing debut for them. I actually got the rights to a baseball play called Bleacher Bums about the fans of the Chicago Cubs, and we made a film for Showtime in 2002 called Bleacher Bums. And then I did a World War II drama for the Hallmark Channel called Silent Night, and I've been involved in some indie films, including a project called Archie's Final Project, which dealt with teen suicide, which won the Berlin Film Festival in 2009. Now I'm very active trying to get movies made in addition to my writing.
Wow. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you put out a different encyclopedia, the Complete James Bond Movie Encyclopedia.
The name is Bond. James Bond.
Now, I'm a bit of a Bond fan. I have all of the movies on Blu-ray. I do not have that book, though, and I'm probably going to need to seek that out.
Well, why don't you wait a little bit, because I've just sold a new edition, which Chicago Review Press is going to publish. Now, you're going to have to wait for a while, because this is something with Bond that's a little frustrating. You know, you don't want to come out before the new Bond movie, because that means your book is immediately out of date. So we're going to wait till 2020, which seems like a million years from now. And we're going to bring it out then after the new Bond movie debuts. They've pushed back the release of the next Bond movie to 2019. So I'll have the book out in 2020. Bond's fun. Bond's fun. And I'm a big Daniel Craig fan. I think that he's really been a Renaissance Bond.
You know, when I first saw Casino Royale, I didn't have high hopes. I'd kind of, and not to take away from any of the previous Bonds, but I think that I had just sort of made peace with the fact that the glory days were kind of done. And then Casino Royale, I was really blown away.
All of us were.
They took a lot of chances, and I think Daniel Craig was great.
He was just, I mean, we were all very disparaging of him. Everybody was. The blonde Bond, give me a break. And yet he blew us all away, and he's a very interesting actor. I think that the films have not been as kind to him as they should. I mean, the quality has jumped back and forth. I mean, I love Casino Royale. I would give Casino Royale a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Quantum of Solace was more like a 5. And then I thought that Skyfall was interesting and, I think much better than Quantum. And then in reviewing Spectre the second or third time, I just didn't like it as much. So I don't know. They're missing opportunities, which I'm hoping that they'll be fulfilled in this new one.
Yeah. With Skyfall, I mean, I just recently rewatched that just in the last couple of weeks, and I really felt like they hit a lot of really good notes. I mean, I felt like I think it was sort of, I think, obvious. This was the 50th anniversary. I think that was the thing, right? Skyfall was the 50th, so they were. I think there was a very conscious attempt to evoke a lot of kind of vintage Bond stuff, and it was a little obvious in parts, but I also felt like it hit a lot of really good notes, and it's a very enjoyable film. Like Quantum of Solace is not an enjoyable thing to sit through. No,
but I have to say this, is when Daniel Craig is on screen, the movie's always very watchable, and it's just that they just didn't give him interesting things to do. Bond movies, you got to throw interesting stuff at Bond, otherwise the audience gets very restless. And then you have to do things a little bit differently and not be robotic. I mean, I always hearken back to Sean Connery in You Only Live Twice, where he's kind of sleepwalking through the whole movie.
Right.
That helicopter chase where he says, "Oh, there's a helicopter, I'll blow it up, boom. Oh, there's another helicopter, I guess I'll use another missile, boom." It was so robotic.
Right.
And there were scenes in Spectre that were very similar, where Bond was kind of going through the paces. And, it has to be better than that. It has to be, we're very spoiled. I mean, Casino Royale set the bar very high.
It did. Agreed. So, Stephen, how does a James Bond historian make the leap from Bond to the Twilight Zone?
Well, it's more of a reflection of where my filmmaking career is going. I got a deal at Showtime to develop original movies, and one of the projects I brought to the table was a Rod Serling biopic. Two great writers, Ron McGidd and Paul Clemens, wrote the first draft of a very good look at the life of Rod Serling, and unfortunately, it didn't fly. These projects sometimes just don't get off the ground. And then another producer came in and wanted to do the same thing, and I was working with him, and that also didn't jump, although it may eventually go. And so I had all this research that was done, and I'm sitting on all this research, literally a foot and a half of paperwork, and I know the books that have come out. I'm a big fan of Zakri's book. Obviously we all bought that in '82 because it was so cool to see all the episodes. And then the Martin Graham's book is filled with interesting information. But I thought that what was needed, and I love the A to Z format because it's just kind of fun to write. I mean, I am not so keen on doing, big behind-the-scenes looks at things. I like the A to Z format. It kind of affords me opportunities that I don't generally have. And there's most of the literature on Bond does not talk too much about the actors. It's mostly about Rod and the writers, and certainly Zakri was fascinated with that, how the stories came about, which was interesting. But I wanted to know more about where these actors came from. And I have to say, after all these years, and I worked on the book for over 3 years, the Zone is, I would say, half the success of the Zone was due to the fact that the way they cast it. I mean, there's the cream of American actorhood there, and I don't think you can discount the value of seeing a face like Jack Warden or Jack Klugman or Bruce Meredith. These guys brought a lot more to the table in many ways, and particularly their personas and their whole kind of aura that really made the episodes just bounce. And, obviously the Inger Stevens and the Elizabeth Montgomerys, the young Robert Redfords. So I noticed a definite gap in all the other books that they didn't really pay much attention to the actors. So here I actually set out to write biographies of everyone with a major speaking role, and I had to write over 500 bios.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to touch on is, typically an encyclopedia is going to be a very dry, rigidly formatted thing. It's just, basically organizing data just for reference purposes. And what I really love about this book is it doesn't fall into that trap at all. It's a lot of fun to read. And with the entries on the different actors, I loved, and I was speaking of Klugman, this is the one I'm thinking of specifically, a lot of that entry is actually quotes from him. It's his own words. And I thought that was a really great way to approach that, is to kind of let the actor do the talking. And I felt like it really brings it to life.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. Yes, absolutely. You and I both think the same way. We don't want to read a dry listing. And, sometimes obviously I couldn't get to the actor either because they passed away or I just couldn't find them. But whenever I could find a particular quote related to the zone, I threw it into the bio. And I interviewed a lot of new people too who hadn't spoken before, not necessarily the lead actors, but a lot of the supporting actors, and they gave me interesting quotes, not only about the show, but a little bit about their background. And then of course there's archival material that isn't easily accessible for people that I needed to synthesize into the telling. Cliff Robertson gives a great interview at I think the Television Academy about the whole thing about the fact that they wanted him out on a Friday for the dummy, and he kind of knew their method. He said, they won't need me till Monday or Tuesday. I'll fly out Monday morning. And of course, this plane crashes into the Hudson and everybody dies, the plane he would have been on. By the way, I have to give you my Twilight Zone story, which I've related a few times. I became very close with Carol Serling on this project. She really opened up the archives to me and just couldn't have been sweeter. And I asked her about Rod's methodology for writing, the things he really wanted to write about and how he went about things. And he said, you should read his foreword to his book of his live television scripts, because he talks a lot about how he writes. And I said, that'd be great. How do I get it? She hands me his personal copy of his live television script. So I bring it home. I put it on my desk. I'm ready to dive into it. And my wife calls me and says, we have to go to some dinner thing. So I leave. I come back and the book has vanished.
Oh.
That book was sitting on my desk. There's no possible way anybody broke in. There was no signs of a break-in. People don't break in and take your Twilight Zone book, especially a 60-year-old book. That probably wasn't that valuable, but still, it was Twilight. It was Rod's book.
Yeah.
I looked for that book for 3 days. I still haven't found it. That was 4 years ago.
Wow. Oh my God.
Twilight Zone moment. Now I'm standing in that same. I have a standing desk now. I'm getting very modern here. I'm standing in that same office. I'm looking at the spot where it used to be, and I don't know if there's a type of bilocation in my office, but sometimes I wonder.
Did it slip into another dimension, perhaps?
Yeah, with a little girl lost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my God! Wow. I hope it resurfaces.
Have you ever had a moment where you lost something that you could not have lost?
Well, usually like my keys. I'm bad about that. I've actually had to train myself over the years to do a self check whenever I go anywhere. I've got a phone, wallet, keys. And every time I'm checking those throughout the day, every day, because I will lose them. But nothing like that. I'm trying to think of a time when Lost.
Well, I went on eBay and I found the same book. Unfortunately, it wasn't an inscribed book, thank God. So I got her. I think I paid $100, and it was. I got her the same book, but it's just weird, just moments, Twilight Zone moments in my life that just defy description. Like when you're sitting at your desk and you're writing a check out to somebody, and you turn to go to the printer for something, and you turn back, and the check's gone. I mean, I don't know how you explain things like that. I think I'm a very pesky poltergeist in this house.
Possibly. Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. Well, yeah, hopefully that resurfaces. Maybe it'll just one day reappear.
Possibly. Hopefully.
Yeah. One of the things getting back to the book that I loved is just a kind of a conceptual thing. Frequently in Serling's closing narrations, he would say something like, file it under J for justice, or something like that. This is literally the physical embodiment of that, because everything is filed in here. And in fact, there is an entry J for justice in the book.
Of course.
And that's another thing. And listeners, if you haven't picked this book up yet, I highly encourage you, as soon as this is done, to race out and get it. It's not just a book of the actors and actresses and production crew. There's so much more going on in this book. And it's not just individual entries, because there are entire entries that are dedicated to like categories. Like you can look up in D, disappearances, and you kind of detail all the examples of things disappearing throughout the show. There's one for angels and devils, which is pretty self-explanatory. Time travel, aliens. Death, sure.
I find it very interesting that Jack Klugman's 4 episodes all deal with death.
Right. Klugman, incidentally, is my favorite Zone actor by a mile. I'm a huge fan of Jack Klugman. His episodes are among my favorites, not just because he's in them, but I love him so much.
I was thinking about this the other day that, late 50s, early 60s, a lot of these actors had not done science fiction. They had not been involved in fantasy. It was kind of an opportunity for them to put on a new mask because, this wasn't a type of genre that was particularly popular in late night in primetime television. The networks were not greenlighting a lot of this stuff. It wasn't until after the Zone went off the air that there were more and more shows devoted to science fiction. It's just kind of interesting. It was, obviously the 50s had a huge a number of film science fiction movies, most of which, of course, were B-exploitative. There were a few A-list films, but, in television, there was very little. I mean, we watched Superman, the George Reeves Superman was science fiction theater. I like this little precursor to Land of the Giants called World of Giants, was kind of interesting, and there was the Jetsons, but science fiction was really not that popular in the 50s on television, at least in the mainstream. And so these actors, I think, had enormous opportunities, and they kind of really reveled at playing these kinds of characters.
Yeah, absolutely. My single favorite section or entry in the book, I said earlier, machines, gadgets, and gizmos, which encompasses many things. You've got the dictaphone from A World of His Own, and you've got the various robots, and you've got the time-stopping timepiece from a kind of a stopwatch. But the thing that I really love, and you do this in multiple sections, is this could have just been a list of objects. What you do here is you essentially write an essay about Serling's love-hate relationship with technology. And you humanize this in such a brilliant way because, again, we're talking about things. These are things that appeared in episodes. But it really humanizes it, and it really kind of weaves this thing where it was like a recurring theme in the fabric of the show, this thing about, technology is wonderful, but technology is also terrible. And I love that you present it in that way, because it's like you've written an essay about it.
Well, thank you. It was not my original intention. The editors at Chicago Review Press were very keen on me going into this area because they felt that it was an opportunity to really talk about the themes that were more prevalent on the show. And originally I had written a character bio for everybody in the show. That's why the book ballooned to 900 pages. And they thought that was very duplicating a lot of the things I had already done. So I pulled all the actor bios out, and I was looking for ways of getting a little bit more of the love of the stories in. So these essays turned out to be a lot of fun for me because you really get to explore the key themes of the series. A lot of television shows don't really have anything like this. Television is either very much about the story of the characters and obviously episodic television. And anthologies sometimes just are anthologies. There's no real rhyme or reason. But Serling was, time travel, fear, death, machines. These were big issues for him, and he dove into them.
Another thing that I really love about the book. Well, there's so many things I love about this book. I can't even tell you.
Isn't it kind of fun that we have this last interview with Rod in the book?
Absolutely, yeah. Readers, under the entry for Rod Serling, I think that's where it is. Or is it somewhere else? I'm flipping through right now.
I think it's Serling's last interview. I think it's under S. I'm getting my book out too because I'm not sure if it was under Rod's last interview or.
Okay, it's right after the Rod Serling entry. It's Serling's last interview, and this is an interview that he did in 1975, very shortly before he passed away. And it's a really great. I mean, I've seen this interview before. Twilight Zone magazine published this way back. It's marvelous. There's so much here. He's talking. It's a great overview of his career, and from his perspective. And he wasn't, egotistical. He wasn't proud. He was very self-deprecating, very hard on himself, and you do get all of that. But it's strange to read because just knowing that was his last interview.
Right.
But it's a great inclusion, and it's not something you would expect to find in this.
Well, obviously I couldn't get to Rod because Rod's been gone for many years, and
yes,
in a way, Rod is alive in my book. I felt thrilled to bring it to there because in a book about the Twilight Zone, you got to have Rod Serling in the book, and the closest thing I could figure a way of getting Rod Serling into the book, other than all the research, was to publish his last interview. So I'm very thrilled that Linda licensed that interview to me. It's it's very nice. He's Rod was such a eloquent speaker. I mean, so lucid, so accessible, and just knew what he had to say. No wonder he became kind of a spokesperson for all television. I mean, he was probably television's first spokesperson who would defend the industry in Washington, and he was such a proponent of TV.
That's just one of the many things of this book. There's a love that really comes through, it's strange to say because it's an encyclopedia. Again, the very word kind of implies this very dry collection of data, but there is a love that comes through all of that. I think that's one of the great successes of this book is that it never feels dry. It's never boring.
Thank you.
There are so many just little neat surprises. I mean, I've had this book, I don't know, a few weeks. I've probably picked it up once a day and just flipped through it for a couple of minutes, and I always find something that just kind of makes me stop and go, oh, wow, look at that. And it's down to tiny, tiny little details, like on the entry for the episode The Shelter, instead of like a picture of the cast, or you put the Civil Defense logo. And it makes kind of a bold visual statement. It really catches your eye, and I think that's a great choice. Another one is the entry for Carol Burnett. We would all expect to see a picture of Carol Burnett. You show a picture of her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which I thought was it's just a little choices like that are a little left of center. And I think it makes the book stand out even that much more.
Illustration has always been one of the great challenges because, basically we're kind of left on our own. The Chicago Review Press was very good with me. They said if the picture was a publicity still, we don't have to worry about the permissions. Some publishers make you sign in blood that this is not owned by the studio. And of course, if you go to the studio, if you go to CBS, they'll charge you $300 for one picture and you wouldn't have a book. So, I mean, I I was able to, well, first of all, Carol gave me 150 pictures just to start off. So she pumped very nicely. And then I went to a lot of the people who are still survivors and asked for some of their own personal photos. And then I just went hunting for every possible photo I could find. And there was a lot out there. And, just really fun. And, it's funny because a lot of people say you got to put color in your book because that's an attraction for readers. Well, the nice thing about writing about the Twilight Zone is you don't have to find any color because the show was in black and white.
Exactly. It shouldn't be in color. I was also very excited to see that there's a whole entry on Forbidden Planet.
Oh, sure.
And I mean, fans of the show know that, Forbidden Planet kind of looms large in the iconography of the show because so much of Forbidden Planet shows up on the Twilight Zone. And you kind of go into all of that, which I love. There's also a separate entry for Robbie the Robot. So I was
one of my best friends in LA is Bill Malone, and Bill, up until recently, has owned Robbie for the last 5 years.
Right. He just sold him, right?
Just sold Robbie for $4.3 million, which I think in the history of movie props is the highest price paid for anything. And I'm not surprised. Robbie is, I completely understand why somebody would want to own the ruby slippers from the Oz, but looking at the ruby slippers after a while, they look like shoes. Sure. But Robbie the Robot, come on.
Right. A good friend of mine was at the auction, so he sent me a bunch of pictures of himself with Robbie, and I was just thrilled and jealous. He's in New York, so he sees all kinds of stuff that I never see. But
when I was writing for Cinefantastique, everybody was telling me you got to go see Bill Malone. Bill Malone is the expert on Forbidden Planet. So I go see Bill Malone. I go into his den, and there's Robbie. And I said, "Oh my God!"
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to control myself. That's just one of those things where you're 6 years old and you can't control it.
Exactly. You're just back at that time.
Yeah. Do we know who bought him?
I don't know at this point. I heard it was a private party. The hope was that he would go to a museum so everybody could, hang out with Robbie. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with Robbie, but Bill finally had to make the decision to sell him. And Bill was amazing. Bill found, Bill was diving into trash bins on MGM's lot back in the late 60s, and he found so much stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's in the Twilight Zone, like those Krell energy panels from the Krell lab that measure the amount of energy being used. I mean, those are all over the Twilight Zone. Whenever there's an interior of a spaceship, they seem to use those energy gauges. And then
we call those the Pac-Man lights on the podcast. Those are the things that I see it and I get excited.
Well, it's really interesting watching the shows from the beginning, all 156 in a row, because you're first of all, you're blown away by the quality. And I include the hour-longs because I think the hour-longs have been disparaged over the years as being bloated. You watch the hour-long episodes and you are fully entertained. And there are some low points. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the bar. The bar gets a little too goofy for my money, but comedy was never to Twilight Zone's strong suits. But when you watch these episodes and dig down with a fast forward or a stop frame and you look at certain things, you really spot some real interesting things. Now, I was particularly interested in things like product placement. And in 156 episodes, I think this is pretty accurate. The only time I could ever find a product placement, if you discount Pat Hingle's Mickey Mouse watch, which I don't really consider product placement. But the only time was in the very first episode, which was not shot at MGM. It was shot on the Universal lot. That was, of course, Where Is Everybody? Earl Holliman walks past a oil sign for Capital Oil, which turns out is a real oil company. That's the only time in the whole original series where an original product was mentioned.
Wow.
A real product. They just did not want the world to look anything like our world in terms of being too. And it's interesting. I was on my own Twilight Zone blog on Facebook. I have the Twilight Zone Encyclopedia.
Right.
A guy was a younger reader was saying that he just doesn't really like the zone because he sees nothing that's familiar to him. None of the none of the streets look familiar. The franchise, I never see a KFC or a McDonald's or a Coca-Cola sign. It's very alien to me. And I said, exactly.
That's kind of the whole
That's
point.
the whole point, exactly.
Oh my gosh. I was watching Dr. No recently, and they kept showing this KFC sign. You talk about product placement in the real world. That there's a lot of.
You weren't watching Dr. No. You were watching Goldfinger.
Oh, that's you know what I'm thinking of Dr. No, because it just turned 55 yesterday. So
That's
I've got
right.
Dr. No on the brain. And you actually contributed to a panel on the Home Theater Forum that I read that I really enjoyed.
Yes, I enjoyed putting that together, offering that once in a while. Sure, it's Dr. No is one of my favorite movies. I mean, not only was it the first James Bond movie, but it was, I think it's a terrific movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there isn't. I mean, I love James Bond, so I'm probably not the most critical viewer, but I love the early ones. I mean, I'm a Connery man, and I like them all. I mean, even Diamonds Are Forever, which is I could run down a list of things I don't like about it. I still like it.
Well, it's kind of a mixture. I mean, it has some really good tension. It also has a little bit of goofiness. I mean, I love Tom Mankiewicz. Tom Mankiewicz was very helpful to me. He's a wonderful writer. He teamed with Richard Maybaum, who was a very serious constructionist and a classic screenwriter, and they contributed that. When the movies got a little bit not so much, well, a little silly and a little too just goofballish maybe at times. That was a little more of Mankiewicz, but he just liked to use language in unusual ways, and some of his repartee was kind of funny. Diamonds is pretty good. Golden Gun was kind of a low point, though. I think that was Tom just kind of surrendering to Roger's kind of light comedy, and then the whole Roger Moore 7 films was, there's some good points and there's a lot of low points.
Sure,
it's a type of Bond, but you cannot deny the popularity. The Spy Who Loved Me, which was released in 1977, the same year as Star Wars, was hugely popular, and kind of revived the series in many ways. So you can't really knock Roger's popularity, but comparing Roger Moore with Sean and, of course, Daniel Craig, it's a whole different Bond.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have a show that ran for 5 seasons, 156 episodes, and it takes a lot of people, cast, crew, etc., to pull that off. This encyclopedia, and you've already said it ballooned to like 900 pages. So at some point, you have to draw a line because you can't include every single thing. Did you set down any specific criteria or requirements for someone or something to meet in order to make it into the book?
Well, it's very good question. I think that I did bios on every speaking part. So if you've got one line practically in Twilight Zone, you got a roll. And I had to go through and preen those. I mean, I was just looking the other day. I was looking for Philip Abbott from the whatchamacallit, the Billy Mooney episode, Long Distance Call.
Oh, right.
Philip Abbott's not there. I mean, he played Billy's father, and Philip Abbott was, had done science fiction films, a very, very good actor. But I had to go through and I had to pull out a number of biographies of people who were not leading actors in the episode. Because if you've got 156 episodes, figure 2 to 3 leading actors per episode. That's almost 400 actors right there. So I had to pull them out, and then, just like I had done with my James Bond encyclopedia, I was kind of getting a little obsessive. I had phone numbers and signage and, all sorts of iconography that I thought was interesting. And sometimes you could see it as a little superfluous. And so I cut out a lot of that stuff. And then, as I said earlier, the character bios had to go. There's no Henry Bemis. There's no those kinds of people. But in my setup, where I describe how the show is set up. And for the listeners who don't know, I did not give you the full synopsis. I think that's terribly presumptuous for authors to give the full synopsis of an episode if people haven't seen it. So you won't find many spoilers in my book, if any, because I really wanted to set up the episode for you, but not give it away.
On a related note, anytime a new book like this might come out, the first is this another episode guide? Which it's not. There are entries for each episode, alphabetically speaking. What I didn't know, and this is one of those great surprises that I discovered accidentally by flipping through it, is the one thing that I thought would be missed from this book, but people would not get, was a chronological list of episodes. There's actually, in the E section, episodes chronological order, which is really thoughtful because, for a reference book, you would want that somewhere. Even though that's been done, right? I mean, the Zickery book, obviously, the Graham's book, as far as just being a book that you can grab and quickly look something up, I just thought that was a great touch to throw that in. But
I don't think Zickery and Graham's actually have an episode list in order, if I'm mistaken. It might be in their index, but I don't think it's in order. Maybe
they're in production order, aren't they?
I think they are in production order. I think that I find constantly having to look up an episode, and I felt that this would be a needed. You always know that all your episodes are listed under episodes, so it's always there for you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I felt it was an important service to provide because I have a tendency sometimes to need to know something immediately, and I don't know where to look. And with Zickery, I had to go into the index, and I think the same with Graham's. And I just felt that you need to have a place to go if you want to know where the episodes are and what you do. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's just, again, like I said, I keep finding little surprises, and it's a thrill because, like I said, almost every day I pick this up and I just casually flip through and something catches my eye and it's like, oh my God, look at that. That's so cool.
Well, one of the little things I threw in there, which nobody had covered at all, was ratings. There's always been talk that Twilight Zone didn't do well in the ratings, but there was no backup. Well, I had to go to the original trade papers in Hollywood, Variety and Hollywood Reporter, to at least see if the show was mentioned. And, I looked through the 5 years of Variety and the Reporter, and it was almost completely invisible. There were a few times when some of the episodes did well, but this was not a ratings hero for CBS, and that's part of the reason that James Aubrey was trying to cancel the show several times. I think that it just wasn't drawing the Gunsmoke numbers or the 77 Sunset Strip numbers or the Detective. It was not that kind of. The Untouchables is another show doing big numbers. But the Twilight Zone had its following. I think it was tremendously respected. I think it should be pointed out to a lot of people who don't know this, that when Rod came west from New York, he had 3 Emmys under his belt. So he may have been the most respected writer to come to Hollywood in a long time. So his agents got him kind of an ironclad creative control contract, which was unheard of then, and it's probably unheard of today. I mean, nobody's giving you final say on anything anymore, and he had total say. So if he wanted to do a story about the Holocaust or the nuclear war potential or child endangerment or racism and disguise it in science fiction terms, they could not stop him.
Circling back to pruning the book down, and you kind of went into that. Was there anything that you cut that you just regretted cutting, that you really wish was there?
Well, they're kind of entries that are a little closer to my heart sometimes that I didn't want to lose. It's funny. You wouldn't think with an encyclopedia, because encyclopedias, they are in many ways a collection of facts, but even those facts are just fun to point out sometimes because you don't kind of see them in a certain context. So I'm actually looking at one of my early drafts of the book right now. I'm going to go through it real quickly, and some things I just kind of I just find interesting. I'm not even sure if this made it. I don't think it did make it, but here's the typical thing. The entry is 17,528.27 miles per hour. And that is an answer to the second question posed by master programmer James Elwood, Wally Cox, to Agnes the supercomputer and From Agnes with Love. The question: indicate maximum permissible velocity of the state aerodynamic missile. So sometimes you just get out of a kick about throwing out a fact that nobody probably needed to know, but we certainly have it. I mean, another thing, I have an entry, 17 cents a pound. That's the entry. The cost of sirloin steak in Harmony, New York in 1890, as advertised on a butcher's shop sign in Once Upon a Time.
Once Upon a Time, yeah.
So, I mean, some of this stuff, I just kind of got a kick writing about. It was just kind of, just kind of cool and fun, and ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And it's, they're just little moments that kind of are fun to write about. And
sure,
they bring back, sometimes I get a little silly. Like I have an entry called Seaweed, and it's what Doc finds on the floor of the passage at the sick bay in the 30-fathom grave. So you're reading that, and maybe you get a little chuckle out of it. So I think that stuff had that kind of came by the wayside. I mean, I guess it's not so much that I regretted losing that stuff, but I kind of felt. I felt it would have been fun to include some of that stuff. But you these days, selling books is much tougher, and not everybody wants a coffee table book this size in their bookstore because they can't sell as many. So I have to give Chicago Review Press a lot of credit because they got the book down. It's still a sizable book. It's over 420 pages, but it's very accessible and easy to carry around with you. It sits on the coffee table without breaking the coffee table.
Sure. I have to ask, one of my passions is music in the Twilight Zone, and you've got lots of entries on the different composers. Was there ever one for Nathan Van Cleve?
Yes, there was. And I'm going to go to it right now because I remember writing it. And how could you not? I mean, he's a major composer. Hang on right now. I'm looking it up. I'm going through all the numbers. I had lots of numbers. There's a million numbers to reference. But let's see. Valley of the Shadow. And yes, Nathan Lang Van Cleve, born May 8th, 1910, died July 2nd, 1970, American film and television composer, conductor, and orchestrator of Dutch descent who composed scores for 12 episodes of The Twilight Zone. Yeah, no, I had him, but obviously he didn't make it.
He didn't make the cut. No, he's not there. That's why I ask.
Yes, well, just so you know, I did write the bio, but unfortunately, I had to lose him. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. that's fine. So my takeaway is this. I thought my Twilight Zone bookshelf was full. I thought that all the bases had been covered between the Zickery book and the Graham's book and the Arlen Schumer book and the Mark Dawidziak book. The Twilight Zone is well-covered territory. It's represented very well from a literature standpoint. So I remember my first thought when I first heard about this book was, really? Another one? And I am so thrilled by this book. I can't tell you. It could have been a boring, pedantic exercise, and instead it's absolutely delightful. It stands proudly among those other books I mentioned. For casual fans, for hardcore obsessive, or for bloggers / podcasters like yours truly. It's absolutely indispensable. I don't know how I lived without this book. Just for context, my blog was during the 5 years that the show was turning 50. So every episode on its 50th anniversary, I would do a write-up of it. I could have used this book then.
I'm delighted to present it to you, Craig. And, it was designed for someone like you because, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of stuff out on the Twilight Zone. Do we really need another book? But I thought that, I thought this would be fun to write and fun to present. And you've really given me a lot of feedback here that leads me to believe that I traveled down the right dimension.
Oh, absolutely. This it's marvelous. And I'm going to use the hell out of this book. I have my autographed copy from you. I'm going to order a spare copy so that can be my reference copy that I grab and I dog ear and I mark up and I keep this copy of it pristine. This will remain on my Twilight Zone shelf.
Well, I've been encouraged to consider coming up to Portland to do a signing at that storied bookstore you have up there.
Powell's books.
Powell's, and it seems to me that might not be a bad idea sometime in January.
Oh, let me know. I would absolutely love to come out and meet you in person. And maybe that's when I'll pick up my second copy and I'll have you sign that one too.
There you go.
I don't know if you've read Dawidziak's book, Everything I Know I Learned on the Twilight Zone.
I haven't read that book. Is it fun?
It actually is. And he actually was on the show several months ago. It's a completely different approach because it's not an episode guide type of book. What he's kind of doing is he's using the Twilight Zone to kind of present life lessons. And it's very fun in a completely different way than your book is. Because I tend to be more of like the reference material type. I mean, I really enjoy, looking up details.
Yeah, and the other book that I think is a fascinating book, just in terms of the illustrations, is Stanyard's book.
Oh, that's right. That's the one I didn't mention.
Yeah, and Stanyard, I got in touch with him, and he was very gracious with me. He let me use about 15 or 20 shots for my book, which I made hay with. And boy, is he sitting on a treasure trove.
Yeah, I completely, he slipped my mind. Yeah, that's a spectacular book.
I may be getting into your area soon because I've got an idea for not so much a podcast, but for a new type of way of, it won't be so much television history, so I won't be able to incorporate the zone as much, but it's more about dialing down deeper into movies and kind of dealing with a lot of the little tricks and things that filmmakers do and maybe some of the Easter eggs and finding little facts in movies that maybe your average viewer wouldn't know and basing it on the history. So I'm teaming up with Susan King, who's a wonderful film historian out of LA, used to work for the LA Times, and we're kind of playing around with a pilot idea that we would pitch to TCM and some of the other movie channels.
Wow, that sounds really neat.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I find all these interesting facts, and I really feel that, if you think about it, other than Ben Mankiewicz on TCM, there aren't a lot of people giving you interesting facts about movie history on the air.
Right. I'm a big film noir fan. They have that Eddie Muller thing, the Noir Alley, Sunday mornings at 7, which is a ridiculous time for film noir. But so he does kind of the Mankiewicz thing where he intros and outros the movies.
Right.
But I love that. And you're right. There's not enough of that, especially for younger generations. I'm talking now of my teenage daughter who will not watch anything in black and white.
Oh, I have the same problem with my kids. I got a 19-year-old son, although he's watched The Zone and loves it. But he, even my wife just said, I don't want to watch an old movie tonight. Come on.
Right.
It's funny because I'm constantly defending the fact that I love watching old stuff. And, I'm finding that it's, just people have their own thing. It is what it is.
Yeah. And I think that, those may be the things that keep it alive, that draw that interest. If the film itself isn't going to be the draw, maybe the presentation of the histories and these little facts, like you said, that's exciting.
Yeah. So I mean, there's also I discover stuff all the time and little. And the other thing, when I was writing the book, just knowing that a lot of these Twilight Zone performers had worked together in live television or worked with certain directors. It was a very small club in those days. And, to have been a fly on the wall. What if somebody had decided to save Rod Serling's original dictaphone? Can you imagine listening to Rod narrating what the story for an episode would have been like? Oh, my God. But, alas, what can you do?
What can you do?
Craig, it's been so nice talking to you tonight.
Same to you. I really appreciate you doing this, Steven. And yeah, if you end up coming up to Powell's here in Portland, let me know.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to look into that, and I'll keep in touch with you.
All right, sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Okay, buddy. Take care. And happy holiday to you.
Same to you.
Okay.
All right, bye. What a great guy. Thanks again to Steven Jay Rubin for coming on the show. And kids, if you don't already have a copy of the Twilight Zone Encyclopedia, I highly recommend that you rectify that ASAP. I'm going to put links in the show notes to both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Please get the book. I can't stress enough how awesome this book is. It is a virtual, veritable cornucopia of Twilight Zone treasures. You need this book. If you're a fan, casual or otherwise, you need this book. That's it for now. We're not going to have a new episode next week, but the week after that will be our annual holiday special. Our good friend Dr. Reba Wisner might just drop by, and hopefully one or two other surprises will pan out that I'm still working on. So we'll see you back here in 2 weeks, kids. Till then, play nice. So we are here to talk about your book. It was released very recently, The Twilight Zone Companion.
No, that's actually Mark Secre's
I'm
book.
sorry, did I say that? Okay, I'm gonna fix. Okay, I'm gonna fix that. Let me back up. I'll chop that part. Good Lord.
Between light and shadow.